we came to the island of the cannibals called Dominica, where we arrived the 9th of March. Near about this place inhabited certain Indians who came down to us, presenting meal and cakes of bread, which they had made from a kind of corn called maize. And they brought us down hens, pines, and potatoes. These potatoes be the most delicate roots that may be eaten.
The natives whom Hawkins called Indians had been given that name by Christopher Columbus in 1492. He thought he'd found a western route to India, but he had in fact made landfall here, 12,000 miles to the east in the Caribbean, another stage on which the adventure of English would be played out. The name Caribbean itself, which denotes the Great Sea and the arc of islands which string out for more than 1,500 miles, came from the real name of one of the native tribes here, the Caribs, who were notorious for their fierceness and cruel treatment of captives. Another version of their name was Canib, from which we get our word cannibal. And the Carib languages gave English cayman, canoe, curare, peccary and tamarind, among other words. From the language of another local tribe, the Arawaks, came hurricane, cassava, guava, hammock, iguana and savannah. Two words used by Hawkins, maize and potato, and mangrove, barbecue probably, and Jamaica itself. As we've seen in India and elsewhere, when English encountered new languages, it soaked up new words. But the adventure here in the Caribbean was very different from the one in India. There, English, initially at least, had to accommodate itself to established languages spoken by people with status and power. In the Caribbean, local people and local languages would be pushed aside. Others would be imported, and they would react with English and other European languages to produce rich and unique hybrids. English interest in the region had begun with attempts to hijack Spanish treasure ships by Drake, Hawkins and others, with the unofficial approval of Queen Elizabeth. We were pirates, and pirate tales were as popular then as now. By the time Daniel Defoe wrote his History of Pirates in 1724, words from their exotic and bloodthirsty world had already entered the language. Doubloon, pieces of eight, sea dog, cutlass, freebooter, privateer and buccaneer. In time, the buccaneers went freelance, preying on ships of all nations, hiding out in fortified bases they set up throughout the Caribbean. The buccaneers were eventually flushed out of their strongholds like this one at Port Royal in Jamaica. The future belonged to other opportunists, the colonists, who'd already begun the systematic exploitation of the Caribbean. Where the Caribbean and the Atlantic Ocean meet lie the tiny islands of Nevis and St. Kitts. British settlement of the Caribbean began here at Sandy Bay in 1624. The first thing the settlers did was to drive the local Carib people off the island. The mainly English settlers at first grew tobacco, then switched to the more lucrative crop of sugarcane. They needed labour to work in the fields and mills. Soon they were importing slaves from Africa, slaves who picked up English words from sailors on the ships that brought them over and from the British on the plantations. The English that was spoken on St. Kitts took different forms. There were many British servants and labourers, and they spoke in their own regional dialects. But those further up the social ladder, the landowners and their managers, aspired to something more refined. One 18th century plantation manager called James Granger put these aspirations into writing in an epic poem in praise of the sugar cane.
What soil the cane affects, what care demands, beneath what signs to plant, what ills await, how the hot nectar best to crystallize, and Afric's sable progeny to treat. A muse that long hath wandered in the groves of myrtle indolence attempts to sing.
In Britain, some critics hailed Granger as the first real writer to come out of the Americas. High society admired his ornate style as English at its best. Whatever its qualities, it was a world away from the language spoken by the majority on St. Kitts, that sable progeny of Afric, as Granger coyly puts it, the black slaves who now outnumbered the white settlers. A taste of their language was recorded by an English carpenter, Samuel Matthews, in the last decade of the 18th century. On St. Kitts, he wrote down the following exchange, a darker version of plantation life than Granger's, and perhaps the nearest we might get to the authentic voice of a slave.
Was matter body kwao, abri ya boshe bang you. You tan na sobe au, da bakra man go wrong you body kwao. What's the matter, brother Quao? I think the overseer hate you. You don't stand to know how that white man is going to wrong you, brother Quao.
This is language that shows the speaker's African origins. Most of the words in this short passage are recognisably English on the page, but the sounds have shifted. Brother has become buddy, a word that's now very familiar, but this is the first time it was recorded. Overseer has become obishe. This is what happens when people try to voice strange words using the sounds that they know. We've seen it before in America, when the Pilgrim Fathers struggled with Native American words. There's another example here. The English word stand has become tan. That's probably because a lot of African languages don't allow two consonants to run together. So the ST of stand has become T, and the ND has become N. Stand, tan. English vocabulary, African grammar. There's one word straight from Africa, bokra, for European or white man, and another has come through Portuguese slave traders. Their word saba has here become sobi, to know.
You tan na sobe au, da bakra man go wrong you body kwao.
This kind of language is called a Creole. It's the result of African and European languages colliding, producing hybrids spoken by the black population.
Let me alone. No so trouble begin now. I go mind take van tone, so knock your rotten shin.
This was the pattern throughout the plantations of the Caribbean. But on each island, the social and racial mix was slightly different, and each island developed its own unique Creole. Unfortunately, English wasn't a benign parent to what it regarded as its rather uncouth offspring. The Creoles continued to be treated by English speakers as unfit for polite society. This pressure meant that some Creole speakers tried to gentrify their language to sound more like the standard English-speaking social elite. So, throughout the Caribbean, there wasn't just a division into two languages, with standard English at one end of society and deep Creole at the other. There was a whole set of variations across society. But however many variations there were, standard English was treated as superior, at least by white speakers. The original inhabitants of the island had been cleared by brute force or disease. English had moved in with the settlers, and now it had dominion over the other forms of language that it had spawned, at least for the time being.